Okay, let me ask you a really simple question. Who drank my coffee? Seriously, just think about that sentence for a second. When you step into the break room and see your empty mug sitting there, you don't actually know if one person drank it or if, say, three different people each took a sip, right? Yet in English, we automatically frame that question in the singular. We use a singular verb, assuming a singular culprit, even when a whole crowd might have done it. Why do we do that? Well, it's not because of pure logic, that's for sure. It's actually because of a set of strict, completely invisible rules running in the background of our minds every single time we open our mouths.
Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're taking a close look at the rules and the rebels of syntax. We're going to expose the invisible structural architecture that holds our everyday sentences together. Because, we usually don't even notice these structures until they break, but they are literally dictating almost everything we say. Here is our roadmap for today. We'll be hitting 1. Invisible threads. 2. Feature basics. 3. Making the case. 4. The agreement game. And finally, 5. When categories leak. Okay, let's dive right into this.
Starting off with section 1, invisible threads, the rules of syntax.
Think of a sentence not just as a random string of words, but more like a physical building. You can't just pile bricks on top of each other and expect a skyscraper to stand, right? A sentence is governed by these strict, invisible forces that dictate exactly where pieces go and how they connect. And the two biggest forces holding this whole building together are selection and agreement. Think of this as the ultimate matchmaker system. The head word, let's say a verb, is kind of like a really demanding boss. Selection is the fact that this boss is demanding a specific type of employee or argument to work with it. But agreement, that's the rule that says the boss and the employee absolutely must wear the matching uniform. They have to share morphological features to prove they belong together.
And this brilliantly illustrates what happens when that uniform code gets broken. Take the phrase, "this fearful warrior." Works perfectly. The singular determiner this matches the singular noun warrior. But what about these fearful warrior? That is a complete agreement failure. The language rejects it entirely because the determiner's number, which is plural, does not match the noun's singular number. The uniform doesn't match, so the structural building basically just collapses.
Moving right along to section 2, feature basics, number, gender, and person.
So what exactly are the threads making up these matching uniforms? Well, the big three are number, gender, and person. Now, what's really fascinating here is how universally languages categorize person. Almost all languages break the world down into 3 distinct little boxes. First person simply means the group includes the speaker, like I or we. Second person means it includes the hearer, like you. And third person, that means it includes neither the speaker nor the hearer. So he, she, it, or they. Our pronouns are custom built to perfectly reflect this universal system alongside number and gender. But then we hit gender, and honestly things get a little weird. English relies mostly on semantic gender. That just means the grammatical gender usually matches the actual, real-world sex of the thing you're talking about, with, a few odd exceptions, like how we affectionately call ships she. But contrast that with German, which uses structural, non-semantic gender. In German, any noun that uses a diminutive ending, basically making something small or cute, automatically becomes grammatically neuter. So, das Männchen, which translates to a small man, actually takes the neuter pronoun it. Function literally overrides real-world logic. All right, section 3, making the case. Who does what to whom? Let's move to our next core concept and see how all this builds. Case marking is the morphological strategy languages use to identify exactly who is doing what to whom. It is the ultimate labeling system. You can see this clearly in Latin, which is heavily case-based. It has 5 distinct cases: nominative for subjects, accusative for direct objects, dative for indirect objects, genitive for possession, and ablative for movement or separation. The noun physically changes its spelling depending on its job in the sentence. On the flip side, languages like English and Chinese have almost completely ditched noun cases. Instead of changing the word itself, they just rely on very strict word order and prepositions to tell you who's doing the acting and who's being acted upon. To really see case in action, consider this Latin sentence from our source material. Caesar Gallus bellum intellit, meaning Caesar inflicted war on the Gauls. The verb here, intellit, is incredibly demanding. It absolutely insists on having 2 specific arguments, and it demands they wear specific case uniforms. It needs an accusative object for the thing being inflicted, that's bellum, or war.
and it needs a dative recipient for who is receiving it. That's Gaullus, the Gauls. The verb forces the rest of the sentence to just fall into line.
Which brings us to Section 4, the agreement game, enforcing the rules. We've seen how strict the rules are, but let's look at some linguistic overachievers. Latin adjectives, for example, are total shapeshifters. In English, the adjective red stays red no matter what it's attached to. Actually, scratch that. Pretty much all our adjectives stay exactly the same. A red man, a red moon, a red sea. But Latin adjectives must constantly change their shape to perfectly match the gender of the noun. Notice how homo ruber is used for a masculine red man, while it shifts to luna rubra for a feminine red moon and mare rubrum for a neuter red sea. The adjective is doing a massive amount of heavy lifting just to prove it belongs to that specific noun.
So the crucial point here is that agreement can be tied to almost any feature. And Hungarian verbs take this to an entirely different level. Hungarian doesn't just agree with the subject. The verb changes based on the definiteness of the object. For instance, én látok egy madarat means I see a bird. But if you say I see the bird, the verb actually changes its form to én látom. The verb itself is broadcasting whether the object it's targeting is a specific thing or just a general thing.
In Hungarian goes even further. Check out this incredible example. Én látlak, which simply means I see you. This is hyper-specific agreement. That single verb ending, lak, is a multitasking marvel. It simultaneously encodes both the fact that the speaker is first-person singular and that the object being seen is second-person. The boss and the employee are basically merged into one perfectly tailored uniform.
Okay, finally, Section 5, when categories leak, the glitch.
But what happens when the real world doesn't fit into these perfectly tailored uniforms? This is the climax of our explainer, the predicament of obligatoriness, or, what happens when reality refuses to fit neatly into strict morphological boxes. Step 1, in syntax, morphology is mandatory. If your language has numbers or cases, you absolutely must choose one. But step 2, what happens when we encounter mass nouns like water that we can't count, or unknown numbers like our coffee thief from the very beginning? Step 3 is the glitch. Because the language rigidly requires a choice, we are forced to invent an arbitrary fix. We force a singular verb onto an unknown crowd just to satisfy the structural rules.
Let me test your intuition on this real quick. Consider the number 0.25. If you were taking a test and earned this score, how would you say it? Does it take a singular noun or a plural noun? Think about it for a second.
Here is the logical inconsistency straight from our source. If we express it as a fraction, we say they gave me a quarter point, totally singular. But if we express the exact same mathematical value as a decimal, we say they gave me 0.25 points, plural. The exact same amount of credit gets treated completely differently by our syntax rules. And this brilliantly proves that human language isn't pure math. When the strict rules of syntax encounter weird edge cases like decimals, the language just patches the leak with an arbitrary rule. And that brings us to the biggest takeaway of this explainer, anchored by this really profound quote from the text. All categorizations leak. There is simply no overarching, perfect system that can flawlessly classify everything in the universe. Human language is incredibly complex and rule-driven, absolutely, but it will never be a perfectly airtight system. It's a living architecture, constantly making compromises to deal with the messy reality of the world it's trying to describe. Which leaves us with this final provocative thought. If syntax is an intricate web of invisible threads, demanding bosses, shape-shifting adjectives, and patched-up leaks, how do you effortlessly perform these massive, invisible calculations every single time you open your mouth to speak? The amount of subconscious feature percolation happening in your brain right now just to process this sentence is absolutely staggering. Keep listening to the structures around you, and I promise you will never look at a simple sentence the same way again.